I'm Margaret Chin, 68 years old, and I thought I knew the people I loved most. That night, I was celebrating my retirement at the most expensive restaurant in the city with my only son and his wife. We toasted to my success, we smiled like family does, or so I believed. But the moment they left, a waiter leaned toward me, his voice trembling, and whispered words that froze my blood, "Don't drink your juice." I saw something. In that instant, the world I built crumbled. My celebration turned into betrayal, and my bloodline became my enemy. I spent 40 years of my life building something out of nothing. 40 years clawing my way up from a widow with a 10-year-old boy and a pile of unpaid bills, to a woman who could sit in the city's finest restaurant and order anything she wanted without glancing at the price. People look at me now and see money. They see success, property, luxury, all the things they dream of but don't have. What they don't see are the decades of sacrifice, the nights I stayed awake until sunrise, working numbers, negotiating contracts, pushing through exhaustion because I couldn't afford to fail. When David, my husband, died young, I thought the hardest part of my life had arrived. A funeral at 42, a child who clung to me asking when his father would come back, and a business barely surviving. But no, David's death wasn't the cruelest thing fate gave me. The cruelest thing was discovering that the boy I raised, the boy I poured every ounce of love and sacrifice into, grew up not to be my pride, but my predator. People tell you children are a blessing. They are your legacy. They will carry your blood, your name, your values. They will protect you when you're old. That's what the fairy tales say. But reality? Reality laughs in your face. Sometimes your children don't see you as a mother at all. They see you as an obstacle. A vault. A walking bank account waiting for its doors to swing open. I used to believe my son loved me. I held on to that belief like a lifeline, through every failed business he ran into the ground, through every desperate call for money, every promise he made to change and never kept. I told myself, he's just lost, he's just struggling. He just needs time. But the truth is sharper, colder. He didn't see me as a mother anymore. He saw me as a source of cash, a safety net, a wallet with a pulse. And I made it worse, didn't I? I kept rescuing him. I kept giving him chance after chance, believing that one day he'd find his footing. Believing that one day he'd finally be the man his father would have wanted him to be. But what did all my sacrifice teach him? That no matter how recklessly he lived, no matter how carelessly he destroyed opportunities, I would always be there to patch the wounds, to cover the debt, to clean the mess. So when I stood in that restaurant, sipping cranberry juice instead of champagne, and announced I was donating $28 million to build women's shelters in David's memory, I saw their smiles crack. My son's eyes went cold. My daughter-in-law's lips pressed into a line. And for the first time in my life, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't a mother in their eyes. I was a pile of money they thought they deserved. What kind of world is it when a woman works herself to the bone to raise her child, only to discover her biggest mistake was raising him at all? What is loyalty worth when blood means nothing, when the people who should be your safest place become the very ones planning your downfall? That night, as the waiter whispered his warning, I understood something I never wanted to admit. Love doesn't guarantee loyalty. Sacrifice doesn't guarantee gratitude. Sometimes the children you raise grow into strangers. Dangerous strangers. And me? I wasn't just betrayed. I was marked for death by the very blood I gave life to. The restaurant was the kind of place where silence had weight. Where the chandeliers glowed like frozen fire above spotless white linens, and the air smelled faintly of truffle oil and money. Every fork, every knife gleamed under the golden light, polished so carefully that I could almost see my reflection in the steel. It was the kind of room where you lower your voice without realizing it, where every word floats into the air and lingers like smoke. I had chosen it for a reason, because this was supposed to be a celebration. I sat at the head of the table, wearing the navy silk dress David once told me made my eyes look like storm clouds. Tonight, I wasn't just Margaret Chin, widow and mother. I was the woman who had just sold her empire, block by block, tower by tower, for $35 million. It was the culmination of everything I had worked for since the night I buried my husband and promised myself our son would never go without. To my right sat Daniel, my only child, now 45 years old. I wish I could tell you I looked at him that night with nothing but pride. But pride had long ago been eroded by disappointment that hardened into a kind of weary dread. Daniel was handsome once, his father's jawline and my dark eyes, but now his features sagged under the weight of too many failures. He was dressed sharply, yes, he always was, but his clothes couldn't hide the desperation that lived in his eyes. That hunger. That constant restlessness of a man who had never built anything for himself, only waited for what he believed he was owed. And beside him, Vanessa. My daughter-in-law for the past 4 years, though it felt much longer. A woman with a practiced smile and a perfume so strong it fought the scent of the food. Vanessa had once been a pharmaceutical sales rep, but she hadn't worked a real job since marrying Daniel. She didn't need to. She had married into what she thought was a fortune waiting for her to pluck. She was beautiful in a way that was almost too sharp, too deliberate, every eyelash, every angle calculated. But beauty has a way of curdling when you see what's beneath it. And I had always felt a prickle of unease around her, as though every word she spoke to me was rehearsed, every gesture carefully constructed. The truth? I never trusted her. And I had tried. God knows I tried. But she had that quality, that subtle coldness, like a woman who loves luxury more than people. The way she looked at me wasn't with warmth, it was with calculation. So there we were, sitting at that table, champagne in their glasses and cranberry juice in mine. My doctor had forbidden alcohol, my blood pressure couldn't take it. So while my son and his wife toasted with golden bubbles, I raised a glass of crimson liquid, pretending I didn't notice how their eyes narrowed at the announcement I was about to make. I told them about the donation. $28 million to build women's shelters across the state. A legacy not for my family's name, but for women like me, women who had been left to raise children alone, women who needed safety, dignity, hope. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Daniel's glass froze halfway to his lips. Vanessa's smile faltered for just a heartbeat before she forced it back into place. Their voices were polite. Their words congratulated me. But their eyes betrayed them. I should have known then. I should have seen what was coming. But mothers, we blind ourselves, don't we? We tell ourselves we're imagining it. That beneath all the failures, the resentment, the greed, our children still love us. I wanted to believe that lie. I needed to believe it. But that night, in that glittering restaurant, under the weight of chandeliers and false smiles, I sat across from my son and his wife, and I felt something I had never let myself feel before, fear. The moment that split my life in two didn't come with a scream. It didn't come with a gunshot, or a knife, or even a raised voice. It came quietly. Softly. Like poison dissolving in water. We were mid-meal when I raised my glass to make the announcement. I could feel my heart pounding as I said the words aloud. $28 million will go to the Chin Women's Empowerment Foundation. Shelters, training, education. A legacy for women who have nothing. The sound that followed wasn't applause. It was silence. Daniel's fork clinked against the plate, and he set it down too hard. Vanessa's smile thinned like paper burning at the edges. I saw it. Just for a second, the flash of fury in my son's eyes. The calculation in hers. They masked it quickly, of course. Daniel lifted his glass, muttered congratulations through tight lips. Vanessa leaned forward, her voice honeyed and false. That's wonderful, Margaret. Truly. But I knew. I've spent my life reading contracts, decoding lies in boardrooms, smelling fear in negotiations. And what I saw in their faces wasn't pride. It was panic. My phone buzzed just then. My financial advisor, Jessica. I excused myself, stepping into the lobby to take the call. It lasted barely 5 minutes, some final confirmations on the paperwork. Nothing unusual. Nothing threatening. And yet when I returned to the table, something felt wrong. The cranberry juice sat waiting for me. Same glass, same scarlet liquid. But when the light from the chandelier hit the rim, I noticed it. A faint cloudiness at the bottom. Not much. Just a residue, like sugar that hadn't dissolved. But I hadn't ordered sugar. My drink had been clear when I left. My instincts screamed. I didn't touch it. The dinner ended politely, as though nothing had shifted. Vanessa kissed my cheek with lips too cold. Daniel hugged me stiffly. "Proud of you, Mom," he said, and for a moment, I almost believed it. Then they walked out, hand in hand, silhouettes framed by the restaurant's glowing doorway. I sat there, alone at the table. My chest tight. My fingers trembling. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him, the waiter. Roberto. Young, nervous, his hands twisting the order pad. He hovered for a moment before stepping closer, leaning down until his lips were inches from my ear. "Ma'am," he whispered, his voice shaking. "Don't drink your juice." I froze. "What?" "I saw her," he said quickly, glancing toward the door. "Your daughter-in-law." She took a small vial from her purse. "She poured something into your glass. Your son was watching the room, making sure no one noticed." I didn't know what to do. But I couldn't stay silent. His words punched the air from my lungs. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. My mouth went dry. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I wanted to deny it, to laugh it off as absurd. But the residue in the glass, their cold, pale faces when I mentioned the donation, every puzzle piece clicked into place, sharp and merciless. "They tried to kill me," I whispered. Roberto's hands shook as he slid something from his apron pocket. A sealed plastic bag. Inside was the glass I'd abandoned. My glass. My poisoned glass. "I switched it," he explained, his voice low. "If you want it tested, here it is. Please, be careful. These people are dangerous." My fingers closed around the bag, cold and slick. Proof. The kind of proof you can't unsee, can't unhold. In that instant, the restaurant around me blurred into nothing. The soft music, the clinking glasses, the laughter of strangers, it all dissolved. There was only the bag in my hands, and the truth that seared itself into my bones. My own son wanted me dead. Not strangers. Not enemies. My blood. My flesh. And as I sat there, clutching the poisoned glass, I felt something inside me harden. The mother in me shattered. What rose in her place was something colder, sharper, more dangerous. Not grief. Not despair. Revenge. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in my kitchen with the lights off, the bagged glass on the counter in front of me, glowing faintly under the streetlights seeping through the blinds. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel's face, Vanessa's smile, that residue at the bottom of my drink. My son had raised a glass to my health while plotting my death. At dawn, I called Linda. My closest friend, my college roommate, the woman who had stood beside me at David's funeral. She was an attorney now, sharp as broken glass, and she didn't waste time with sympathy. When I told her what had happened, her voice was ice. "Bring me the glass. We'll handle this quietly." We drove together to a private lab, cash only, no questions asked. I slid the sealed bag across the counter to a technician with tired eyes and trembling fingers. Full analysis. Today, I said, stuffing bills into his palm. He didn't argue. Money makes things move fast. Hours later, the results came back. The paper was thin, clinical, unemotional. But the words might as well have been written in fire. Propranolol. A blood pressure medication. In a dose 10 times higher than therapeutic. Enough to cause bradycardia, hypotension, cardiac arrest. It would have been perfect. A woman of 68, already with hypertension. My death would look natural, tragic, but unsurprising. A sad heart attack after a long, stressful career. The paramedics would have shrugged, the coroner would have signed off, and my son would have inherited everything. I felt my stomach turn to stone. Linda didn't flinch. She slid the report into her leather briefcase, snapped it shut, and looked me dead in the eye. Then we find out why. She called in a favor from her husband, a retired police captain. Discreet, methodical, ruthless when needed. Within days, the investigation began. A private investigator tracked Daniel and Vanessa's movements, hacked into their records, scraped through their lives. What came back was filth. Daniel wasn't just in debt. He was drowning in it. $3.8 million owed to loan sharks and silent creditors who don't knock twice before sending someone to break your legs. 2 failed businesses in 5 years, both bankrupted. Lavish spending he couldn't afford, cars he leased then abandoned, promises he never kept. My son wasn't just desperate, he was cornered. And Vanessa? She was worse. $650,000 in hidden credit card debt, all luxury shopping. Jewelry, clothes, first-class trips, designer handbags stacked in closets. A compulsive spender, bleeding money faster than Daniel could lose it. She hadn't married him for love. She had married him for access. Access to me. Then came the digital trail. Browser history, inheritance acceleration. How to poison without detection. Symptoms of propranolol overdose. Emails between them, encrypted but cracked open like rotten fruit. 8 months of planning, beginning the very week I announced my intent to sell the company. They called me the obstacle. They spoke of our future once she's gone. I stared at those words until my vision blurred. My son. My blood. Plotting my death like a business transaction. And his wife, encouraging it, pushing him, urging him on. It was all there. The motive. The means. The plan. Linda spread the documents across her mahogany desk like evidence in a courtroom. Toxicology. Witness testimony. Financial ruin. Digital proof. She leaned back in her chair, her voice calm but deadly. We could take this straight to the police. Attempted murder. They'd both rot in prison. But prison wasn't enough for me. Prison was too clean. Too final. Too easy. I didn't want them locked away where they could forget me. I wanted them to remember me. To live every day knowing I held their future in my hands. To feel the same cold fear I felt holding that poisoned glass. I shook my head. No, Linda. Jail is mercy. And mercy is something they don't deserve. That night, as I sat alone in my study, staring at the flames in the fireplace, I whispered the truth aloud, tasting the bitterness of it on my tongue. My son tried to kill me. And then, softer, darker. He has no idea what I'm about to do. I set the trap in silence. Linda arranged everything, her office, the documents, the timing. She called Daniel and Vanessa under the pretense that I was reconsidering the size of my donation. She may scale it back, Linda told them. She wants to discuss adjustments. It was bait wrapped in gold, and they swallowed it whole. The morning of the meeting, I dressed deliberately. A gray suit, simple and sharp. My hair pulled back into a bun, no makeup. I wanted them to see me stripped of softness. No warmth. Just the woman they had tried to bury. When I walked into the conference room, they were already there. Daniel in a suit he couldn't afford, Vanessa in a pale blue dress, the picture of elegance. Their faces lit up with false smiles the moment they saw me. "Mom," Daniel said, arms opening for a hug. I didn't move. His embrace hung in the air, then dropped like dead weight. We sat. Linda was beside me, her leather folder resting on the table. Across from us, Daniel and Vanessa leaned forward like vultures circling a carcass. I began slowly. My voice calm, almost casual. I'd been thinking about the foundation. Maybe I was too hasty in deciding how much money to give away. Their eyes flickered, greed flashing like lightning. Vanessa reached for my hand, her tone syrupy. "That's very wise, Margaret. You've worked so hard. You deserve to enjoy it. Enjoy it." I almost laughed. Enjoy the life they had tried to shorten. Instead of responding, I slid a document from my purse. A lab report, sealed with official stamps. I placed it on the table and pushed it toward them. "Do you know what this is?" Daniel frowned. Vanessa's hand froze halfway to her wine glass. "It's an analysis of my cranberry juice from our dinner," I continued, my voice cutting like a blade. It contained a lethal dose of propranolol. Enough to stop my heart in minutes. Enough to make my death look natural. Silence. Heavy. Crushing. Daniel's face went pale, his jaw slack. Vanessa's eyes flicked to him, then back to me, her mask cracking at the edges. I leaned in. "The waiter saw you, Vanessa. He saw you pour powder into my glass while my son kept watch. He saved that glass. He gave it to me. And now I have proof." Daniel's body crumpled first. His head dropped into his hands, his shoulders shaking. "Mom, please," his voice cracked. I was desperate. I didn't know what else to do. The debts, the pressure. I made a mistake. A mistake. Poisoning your own mother was a mistake. Vanessa, though, didn't flinch. Her voice was cold, her tone rehearsed. "This is absurd. Anyone could have tampered with that glass. You're accusing us with no real evidence. It won't hold up in court." Linda smiled thinly and opened her folder. She laid out file after file. Financial records. Browser history. Encrypted emails. Pictures of their debts, their lies, their plans. The weight of the evidence spread across the table like a death sentence. Daniel sobbed harder. Vanessa's eyes narrowed to slits. I waited until their silence cracked, then gave them the choice. My voice was ice. "You will sign a full confession. You will leave this country permanently. In exchange, I will pay your debts one time. $50,000 to disappear. That's it. Or, I tapped the lab report with my finger. Or I take this to the police. Attempted murder. Conspiracy. You'll rot in prison." Daniel collapsed. "We'll do it. We'll sign. Just, please," his words drowned in tears. Vanessa hesitated, rage twisting her face. But she saw the steel in Linda's eyes, the certainty in mine, and she knew it was over. With a trembling hand, she picked up the pen. They signed. Line after line, their handwriting shaking. Confessions. Agreements. Promises of exile. When the final page was complete, I gathered the papers, slid them into my folder, and stood. My voice was flat, stripped of everything but truth. You didn't just poison my drink. You poisoned this family. From this moment, you are nothing to me. Both of you are dead in my eyes. And as I walked out of that office, leaving them behind, I felt it for the first time. Not relief. Not victory. Power. They left at dawn with 2 small suitcases and a plane ticket that smelled of cheap paper and finality. Daniel walked like a man who had been hollowed out, shoulders collapsing under the sudden difference between want and consequence. Vanessa held her chin high, a practiced posture of someone who had rehearsed indignation into an art. I watched them go from the safety of my stoop, feeling nothing like triumph, only a cold, hollow silence that echoed in the spaces they'd once filled. The settlement was humiliatingly small, $50,000 to make their problems disappear and to keep violent creditors at bay. That was my mercy, a last, sharp kindness so I'd never have to see them broken on the street by men who don't bother with morality. They signed away their right to my life, to my presence, to any contact. They left the country as ghosts, bound for a sun that would not warm them. Costa Rica, of all places, paradise for people running from consequences. After the door closed, I expected satisfaction, some rattling sense of justice done. Instead there was a vacuum. I had orchestrated the end of their presence in my life and felt nothing but the steady ache of a wound that would not close. For 3 months the house knew the shape of my grief. I walked rooms that used to echo with childhood laughter and only heard the tick of clocks keeping time for a life that diverged from mine. I went through motions, meetings, charity boards, calls to contractors, and each task felt like pressing a palm to a bruise. Guilt arrived in waves. I replayed every decision I had made as a mother with the terrible curiosity of after-the-fact detectives. Had I been too busy building an empire to see his emptiness? Had my work been an absence he learned to live with, not a lesson he learned from? Memory is treacherous, kind in some corners, cruel in others. I remembered teaching Daniel to tie his first tie, the way his face lit up the first time he closed a successful deal at 23. I remembered standing in his room when he was a boy, listening to him breathe through fevered nights. Those memories stung now, like salt in an open wound. And yet there was evidence I could not ignore. Daniel's pattern was not overnight, it had been a slow drift into entitlement. Jobs that lasted months, not years. Businesses launched with bravado and abandoned at the first tremor. I'd given him lifelines, not realizing the shape of his greed. I'd given him rope and he'd learned to swing from it. Vanessa had been the match and the kindling, the one who taught him how to stretch for luxury and not balk at moral boundaries. Their greed had been methodical. They had carved their future from my name. People asked if I regretted the method of punishment. If I wished I'd called the police instead. I answered truthfully, prison would have been too easy for them, and it would have turned my life into a spectacle. I had wanted their exile to carry with it the quiet, gnawing weight of loss, not the spectacle of bars and headlines but the slow erosion of identity. To watch their lives crumble abroad, without the comforts of status or easy access to money, is a punishment that lingers. Humiliation is persistent. It crawls under your skin and whispers in the night. During those months, solitude taught me a thing I had been too proud to learn. Survival is not only about making it through the next deal. It is about waking up and choosing to be decent even when everyone else is hungry for your ruin. I found a hard, stubborn peace in the routine, walking along the shoreline where David and I had once planned a life full of small comforts, attending foundation meetings, visiting the shelter to see the faces of women who were not me yet bore wounds I recognized. Their gratitude was not for my money alone, it was for someone finally listening. At night, in the honest dark, I allowed myself the luxury of anger. Anger is a hot coal you can clutch to keep from freezing. I burned with it, a slow, controlled fire. I thought of Daniel's hands that had once helped me lift drywall and lay tiles when the business was just a single in. I thought about how those hands had turned from tools of creation to instruments of greed. I mourned not only what they had tried to take from me, but what they had chosen to become. 3 months in, I woke up one morning and found not peace but resolve. The ache had not gone, but a new shape had formed around it, purpose. Grief had been a raw, impatient student, now it became a teacher. I started throwing myself into the work the money had been meant to fund. I moved through paperwork with an energy that surprised me, visited prospective sites, spoke with social workers until my voice rasped. The shelters were never about revenge. They were about building something so steady and true that even betrayal could not loosen its foundation. In the quiet that followed their exile, I learned how to be alone without being lonely. I learned how to hold anger and still choose construction over ruin. I learned that sometimes punishment is private, deliberate, and not the loud justice of the courts but the quiet removal of yourself from people who would devour you. Exile kept them alive, it also let me live. And that, in the end, felt like survival, like a victory that did not require celebration but demanded dignity. Revenge gave me power. But power is not the same as peace. After their exile, after the silence settled, I realized I couldn't keep living in a house haunted by betrayal. Every corner whispered Daniel's laughter as a boy, every frame on the wall felt like a cruel reminder of the son I no longer had. If I stayed buried in that pain, their poison would win, even if I never drank it. So I did what I've always done when life tried to break me. I built. The Chin Women's Empowerment Center became my new battlefield. If my son saw me only as a wallet, I would make sure strangers, women who had no one, would see me as something more. Brick by brick, blueprint by blueprint, I carved purpose from my grief. The first building rose on the bones of an abandoned warehouse downtown. A place for battered women to find shelter, for mothers with empty pockets to find work, for children to feel safe. The ribbon-cutting day should have felt like triumph, but for me, it was a reckoning. Reporters asked questions, flashbulbs went off, but my eyes were on the crowd, searching faces. That's when I saw her, Elena. A young woman, 32, with eyes too sharp for her age. She worked as a volunteer coordinator, and when she shook my hand, her grip was firm, unafraid. "Thank you, Mrs. Chen," she said softly. "You don't know what this means to people like us." Something in her voice caught me. A cadence I couldn't place. Later, over coffee in the small center office, she told me her story. Social worker. Dedicated. Fierce. Raised by adoptive parents who had given her everything they could. Then she said a name. Rachel Santos. My breath caught. Rachel had been my housekeeper 30 years ago. Sweet, gentle, devoted. One day she vanished, no explanation. I had always assumed life had carried her elsewhere. Elena leaned forward, eyes glistening. She was my mother. She left me with an adoption agency when she was 19. She told me once she had no choice. The floor shifted under me. My pulse roared. Suddenly, the sharp line of her jaw, the curve of her smile, it was familiar. Painfully familiar. Daniel. Elena was Daniel's child. My granddaughter. Hidden from me for decades. The truth spread through me like fire. While my son had been plotting my death for money, another piece of my bloodline had been out there, quiet, hardworking, giving her life to save others. And unlike him, she asked me for nothing. When she finally told me, her voice cracked. "I didn't want to disrupt your life. But I thought you should know. You have a granddaughter." I stared at her, fighting the storm inside me. Decades of sacrifice for a son who had betrayed me. And here, by sheer fate, was proof that not all of my blood was poisoned. I reached across the table and took her hand. "Elena," I whispered, my throat tight. "If you'll let me. I want to know you. Not as a benefactor. As your grandmother." Her smile broke me. It was the smile Daniel used to have before greed hollowed him out. Pure. Untainted. That night, I realized something. They hadn't destroyed me. They'd stripped me bare, yes, but beneath the ruin, they had given me a gift I hadn't expected. A second chance at family. A granddaughter who carried not his greed, but my resilience. And for the first time since the night of the poisoned glass, I felt something close to hope. 2 years later, I stood at the entrance of the 4th Chin Women's Empowerment Center. The air was heavy with the sound of children laughing, nails being hammered into wood, and the buzz of a future taking shape. The ribbon fluttered in the wind, bright red, bold against the gray stone walls of the new shelter. This was no longer just a project, it was a movement. And at the heart of it stood Elena, my granddaughter, directing staff, coordinating volunteers, her clipboard clutched like a general's sword. Watching her was like watching redemption itself walk on 2 legs. Elena had become the foundation's director, pouring her heart into the work. The women loved her, the children adored her. She was everything I had once prayed Daniel might become, responsible, steady, driven by something greater than herself. Only she hadn't needed my money to find her worth. She carried it in her bones. I had funded her master's degree in nonprofit management, and she excelled like she was born for it. At her graduation, I sat in the front row, clapping harder than I'd clapped for anything in years, tears stinging my eyes as she walked across the stage. She looked down at me in her gown, smiled, and mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." But it wasn't gratitude I felt. It was vindication. Proof that not all of my blood was corrupted. That the poison Daniel and Vanessa had tried to pour into my veins had not infected the legacy I was leaving behind. Then came the email. It arrived in the dead of night, my phone buzzing on the nightstand. A name I hadn't seen in years blinked on the screen, Daniel. I opened it, my hand steady, my heart colder than ice. Mom. I heard about Elena. About the centers. I want to see her. Please. Can you put me in touch with her? Desperation bled through every line. He wrote of Costa Rica, of money lost, of debts that followed him like shadows even across oceans. He begged me to let him meet the daughter he never acknowledged, never wanted, never lifted a finger for. I didn't reply. I didn't forward it. I didn't breathe a word of it to Elena. Some doors remain locked because behind them is only fire. Instead, I hit block. Daniel had chosen his path years ago, the night he raised a glass to my death. I would not let him stain the life Elena was building, the purity she carried. He was gone, as far as I was concerned. A shadow. A ghost. Weeks later, Elena and I stood side by side at the new center's opening ceremony. Reporters crowded us, cameras flashed, and the mayor shook our hands. But my attention was fixed on a sapling in the courtyard. Together, Elena and I pressed our hands into the soil, planting a tree where the women and children could one day sit in its shade. As the roots took hold, I felt something shift inside me. A circle closing. Daniel was my blood, yes. But blood is only biology. Family is choice. Loyalty. Sacrifice. And Elena had proven herself more family in 2 years than Daniel had in a lifetime. I glanced at her, her hair pulled back, her face alight with determination. She looked up at me, and in her eyes I saw not betrayal, not hunger for wealth, but something rare and precious, belief. That tree we planted together wasn't just for the shelter. It was for us. For the family I thought I had lost, and the family I had found. Daniel poisoned his future with greed. Elena watered hers with hope. And me? I finally understood that sometimes you have to burn down the old family tree to let a new one grow. 2 years later, I stood at the entrance of the 4th Chin Women's Empowerment Center. The air was heavy with the sound of children laughing, nails being hammered into wood, and the buzz of a future taking shape. The ribbon fluttered in the wind, bright red, bold against the gray stone walls of the new shelter. This was no longer just a project, it was a movement. And at the heart of it stood Elena, my granddaughter, directing staff, coordinating volunteers, her clipboard clutched like a general's sword. Watching her was like watching redemption itself walk on two legs. Elena had become the foundation's director, pouring her heart into the work. The women loved her, the children adored her. She was everything I had once prayed Daniel might become, responsible, steady, driven by something greater than herself. Only she hadn't needed my money to find her worth. She carried it in her bones. I had funded her master's degree in nonprofit management, and she excelled like she was born for it. At her graduation, I sat in the front row, clapping harder than I'd clapped for anything in years, tears stinging my eyes as she walked across the stage. She looked down at me in her gown, smiled, and mouthed two words, "Thank you." But it wasn't gratitude I felt. It was vindication. Proof that not all of my blood was corrupted. That the poison Daniel and Vanessa had tried to pour into my veins had not infected the legacy I was leaving behind. Then came the email. It arrived in the dead of night, my phone buzzing on the nightstand. A name I hadn't seen in years blinked on the screen, Daniel. I opened it, my hand steady, my heart colder than ice. Mom. I heard about Elena. About the centers. I want to see her. Please. Can you put me in touch with her? Desperation bled through every line. He wrote of Costa Rica, of money lost, of debts that followed him like shadows even across oceans. He begged me to let him meet the daughter he never acknowledged, never wanted, never lifted a finger for. I didn't reply. I didn't forward it. I didn't breathe a word of it to Elena. Some doors remain locked because behind them is only fire. Instead, I hit block. Daniel had chosen his path years ago, the night he raised a glass to my death. I would not let him stain the life Elena was building, the purity she carried. He was gone, as far as I was concerned. A shadow. A ghost. Weeks later, Elena and I stood side by side at the new center's opening ceremony. Reporters crowded us, cameras flashed, and the mayor shook our hands. But my attention was fixed on a sapling in the courtyard. Together, Elena and I pressed our hands into the soil, planting a tree where the women and children could one day sit in its shade. As the roots took hold, I felt something shift inside me. A circle closing. Daniel was my blood, yes. But blood is only biology. Family is choice. Loyalty. Sacrifice. And Elena had proven herself more family in 2 years than Daniel had in a lifetime. I glanced at her, her hair pulled back, her face alight with determination. She looked up at me, and in her eyes I saw not betrayal, not hunger for wealth, but something rare and precious, belief. That tree we planted together wasn't just for the shelter. It was for us. For the family I thought I had lost, and the family I had found. Daniel poisoned his future with greed. Elena watered hers with hope. And me? I finally understood that sometimes you have to burn down the old family tree to let a new one grow. People ask me if I regret it. If I regret the exile, the silence, the clean severing of ties with the only son I ever had. The truth? No. Regret is for those who had no choice. I had a choice, and I made it. Daniel tried to poison me. He looked at me and saw not a mother, not a human being, but a locked vault. And when I wouldn't hand over the key, he tried to smash it open with poison. Blood makes people think they're entitled. But blood alone doesn't earn loyalty. Actions do. Choices do. I lost a son, yes. But what is a son who plots his mother's death worth? Nothing. Less than nothing. He dug his own grave with greed, and now he lives in it. But life is not just subtraction. Sometimes, when one part of you is cut away, another part is revealed. In losing him, I found Elena. My granddaughter. My unexpected salvation. She carries the fire Daniel squandered. She carries a future worth building. Through her, I've learned that legacy isn't about inheritance, it's about impact. They poisoned my drink. But in the end, it was their future that curdled, not mine. I stand stronger because of it. They sit in exile, chained to the hunger that destroyed them. I sit here planting roots, watching women rebuild lives, watching children run free without fear. I see Elena thriving, not because of money I gave her, but because of the strength she forged herself. I've learned a final, brutal truth. Sometimes the family you create with your choices is stronger than the family you're given by blood. Sometimes strangers share your values more than your kin ever will. Daniel's betrayal taught me that blood is not sacred. Elena's loyalty taught me that love can be. So here's my answer, my closing line. They tried to poison my drink, but instead, they poisoned their own future. They thought they were ending me, but all they did was cut themselves out of my life. And in the ashes of their betrayal, I found something purer, stronger, and infinitely more precious. I found family worth fighting for.